Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Rashid Ahmed, and I'm the co-host for Saskatoon Radio and Voice of Saskatoon. And today we are presenting mental health and wellness, and more focusing on what we can do as individuals. Just a little bit housekeeping item before we will move towards our webinar. So if you have any questions, you can send us messages through Facebook. So there is a comment section on Facebook Live where our video is going live. You can send us message and we will take those messages after the end of the presentation. Without any further delay, I will introduce our exciting guest for today. So we do have Jennifer from Intentional You. And before I will pass it down to Jennifer, so I would like to share a journey and introduction of Jennifer. So Jennifer is edgy, funny, and loves to challenge the status quo. With over 25 years of leadership experience in public and private organizations, she climbed the corporate ladder to discover her passion for innovation, leadership, development, and unlocking people's potential. In her climb to the top, she shattered the proverbial glass ceiling as a woman in a masculine-dominated industry. In 2011, at the Ministry of Highways and Infrastructure, Jennifer was the first woman to hold a position as an assistant deputy minister and went on the lead the operation division, where she was responsible for leading team of over 1,000 employees and budget over 300 million. She's a professional accountant, but by no means is she a typical accountant. She draws on her executive coaching training to refine what success looks like through her company, Intentional You. There, she challenges individuals to question their stories, their capabilities, and their judgment of themselves, to give them the platform to jump beyond what they ever thought was possible. Well, welcome, Jennifer, for joining us today. And it's our pleasure to have you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Rashid. It's always so weird to hear somebody else speak of you. So I'm going to just turn that back onto you. First, thank you so much for inviting me to this important conversation with the Voice of Saskatoon. You know, when I think about mental health, mental wellness, and I think about the last, 5 or 6 months, this topic is so prevalent, and we really need to dive into having a different conversation around mental health. And I really honor you, Rashid. It's exciting to get to work with you again, and you are one person that really stands up as a pillar in the community who continues to go above and beyond to support this journey for other people. So I really want to thank you for all the work you do, and that as I always say, you are somebody who I really look up to as a colleague and as a friend who inspires me to continue to give and to be a better person. So thank you for everything that you do for the community.
Thank you for kind words.
Yeah. And so when I think about mental health and wellness, I just want to start off and just give a little bit of a caveat that this conversation today, and I do want it to be a conversation. So anybody who's listening live right now, and if you do have questions, please use Messenger and message us, because I do want it to be a conversation and not just a talk. And before we start into it, though, I do want to give a caveat that I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a trained counselor. I'm not a trained psychiatrist. I'm not a trained psychologist. What I am is an executive coach, and I am somebody who has gone on a journey to understand what mental health really means, because, I think as all of us, we look at stress in a different way, and stress plays such a crazy part of our lives. I've been looking at stats, and, at least 3/4 of us are experiencing stress on a regular basis. And those numbers, that's shocking. Extreme stress on a regular basis. And these stats were before COVID hit. So I don't even know what these stats would be right now. But what I do want to say is that, there's a lot that we can do, that we can take control of. But at any point in time, if you're feeling like the stress that you're experiencing is completely extreme, or if it's severe and disruptive to your life, if you're finding that you actually can't cope, or it's been something that you have never experienced before, or you're ever thinking about harming yourself or harming others, what I do ask of you is that you seek help immediately. This conversation is not about that. If you are experiencing prolonged depression or anxiety, or wanting to, not wanting to get out of bed, I urge you to phone 811, the helpline if you're in Saskatchewan, the helpline in Saskatchewan, or 911, or reach out on the internet and seek help. There's free help all over the board. So I really want to preference this conversation from that point of view first. So now that we have a little bit of that out of the way, I think that there's a lot as individuals that we can actually do to maintain our mental health in a really good, healthy status. There's a lot of mental illness that's out there in the world, and it really comes from stress. So if you think about where stress comes from, there's this place in our brain, our amygdala, which is the place that looks for danger. And so this is the part of our brain that actually hasn't evolved with us. So this is the very reptilian part of our brain. And so it's looking for stress, and it's experiencing and responding to stress. And it was such an important part when we were, when we didn't have the same security that we have right now in homes and things like that. And so this part of our brain will fire off all the time, and it releases cortisol into our body. And when cortisol is released into our body, the stress hormone, it actually prevents us from making really good rational decisions. So if you think about how often in a day you experience some of these, stressful events, and thinking about how much this cortisol is released into our body, what it does is it unbalances us. So when cortisol is running in our body, we actually go into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And if we're always operating in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, we're having a really hard time making decisions, which is why at the beginning I really prefaced to say, if you are experiencing something that is completely out of the norm for you, where if you're defensive all the time, or if you are, in a relationship and you find yourself on edge all the time, to reach out and start to analyze and get some help around that. And if any of you have an employee and family assistance program, this is what it's for. This is what it's designed for, to really help us through some of these stressful periods or times in our lives. And as individuals, what I truly believe is self-care really starts to set us up as individuals to be able to manage stress in a different way. And so I come back to, there's really 5 important pillars of self-care, and I have them in a particular order for a reason, and I'll kind of walk everybody through that. So first, I think it is the most important to stay hydrated. I think as a society, we don't drink enough water on a regular basis. So right now, how many of you are thinking right now, oh my goodness, I don't even know when the last time I drank a glass of water was. So I just want you to, just maybe take a second and go grab some water right now, because I do really think that as a society, we're dehydrated. So I'm just going to take a sip of water. So think about a plant. So if you have a plant growing and you're fertilizing the plant and you're putting the plant and you're making sure the plant has sun, but you never water the plant, what happens to the plant? It starts to wilt, it starts to wither, and it starts to die. As human beings, we are made up of 70 to 85% water. So think about what we're doing to our bodies if we are not actually putting the right amounts of water into our bodies on a regular basis. We are slowing down our systems in our body. So if you think when we're slowing down our systems in our body, we're slowing down our digestive system, we're slowing down our immune system, we're slowing down our nervous system when we don't have the right amounts of water flowing through our circulatory system. So if we're dehydrated, everything in our body slows down, including our capacity to make really good choices. So that is the first thing that's always where I start. When I'm starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed, or I'm starting to feel the stress start to seep in, that is the very first place that I go, is to slow down and have a little bit of water and make sure that I'm hydrated on a regular basis. And I've trained on this, and I've, done, hour-long webinars just on water, because I think it is that important to fuel ourselves properly with starting with water. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you're hydrated. And again, these are things that what we can do personally to really set ourselves up for success for mental wellness. Because if we can set ourselves up for success for mental wellness, if those periods of stress come into our lives, which of course they're going to, we're all experiencing stress on a regular basis. Just some people might be more resilient and more able to bounce back from that stress than other people. So these are some things that as individuals, what we can do to really set ourselves up for that success. So hydration. The next thing is about putting good food in our body, fueling our bodies with high quality nutrition, and making sure that, once we're hydrated, once our body is ready to absorb those nutrients, making sure that we're putting good nutrients in our body, if that's whole foods or if that's, using supplements, because our food, we can't get all of the nutrition out of our food anymore because of, how our food is produced. So making sure that we're making really good informed choices on what we eat. And sometimes that might be limiting even caffeine in our bodies. We might want to limit the alcohol intake in our bodies, because those are things that slow our systems down. And so when you think about mental wellness, sometimes when we experience stress, people will use different things to numb that stress out. The number one thing that people go to help relieve stress is actually food. Lots of people will go to food, and you hear about it, you hear comfort food, and people will be reaching for food to try and make ourselves feel better, which it never actually works that way. It's never the food that makes us feel better. We'll get a temporary relief from whatever is stressing us out, but then it usually starts that vicious cycle. So you even look at the stats, I've said the stats on stress, and the stats on stress continue to rise year over year over year, but you also look at the stats on obesity. The stats on obesity continue to rise because we're not necessarily making really good choices to manage some of those stress in our lives. So there's lots of amazing programs out there to help us make really good choices when it comes to what we're fueling our body with, versus the really convenient choice of, the chips or the fast food, or, the high sugar foods and drinks that are out there. There's some really good alternatives out on the market, but it takes time to be able to make sure that we can take those conscious choices. And, and like I said right at the very beginning is, it doesn't matter how you can be eating the most amazing, high quality, nutritious food, but if you're dehydrated, your body's not actually absorbing those nutrients into your body, because there's nothing there to absorb it in. Just like the example of the plant, you put all of the amazing fertilizer on top, but you don't water it, and that fertilizer is still sitting on top, and it never goes into the roots. And it's the same with nutrition. If we're not hydrating our body, it doesn't matter what we put in our body. It's not going to be absorbed, and we're not going to get the benefit of those nutrients and minerals and supplements that if you're making those conscious choices to be able to find. So those are the first two. The next one, which I kind of get a little bit jacked up about, I think I do about all of them, but I get excited about talking about what we put in our head. So the first two were really what we put in our physical bodies, from water, from nutrition, and a really important part of mental health is what we put in our head. And I love the saying, we become the sum of the 5 people that we are in constant communication and constant interaction with. So I want you to just sit right now and think about, who are the top 5 people that you interact with the most in your life? And I want you to just ask yourself a question, is how they're showing up in the world and showing up in the relationships, is that mimicking how you're showing up in your relationships, is showing up in the world, showing up in the community that you're in? Because I truly think that we really do, feed off of each other from a social interaction point of view. So what we put in our heads becomes very, very important. And it's really a journey about a different level of self-awareness. So if you are somebody if you love the news and you can't get enough of the news, I just want you to think about, and I'm not one of those people. I think since the age, I think it was grade 4. I remember being in the school and every single week they brought us in the library of this little school, and all of the grades, 1 through 6, and we would watch I think it was W5 at the time. And there was this one program, and it was on nuclear war and being prepared for it. And since that point in time, I went home after that, and I remember it being a kid and, being 7 or 8 and not being able to sleep for a week because I was so afraid. And from there, it actually shaped me, not actually watching the news, not listening to the news, not reading the news. And what I find is that sometimes in the roles that I have to play as a senior executive, I need to actually follow the news, and I can tell how that impacts, how I interact with people when I read the news, because there's not a lot of news stories that are super uplifting. If you think about the news stories right now, they are, it's all about destruction, and it's about hatred, and it's about crime, and it's about, what's going on in the world right now around COVID. And you look at the news and it's fighting. It is not inspirational at all. We are not lifting each other up as a society. We are not helping each other as a society, look at things differently and become better. We are fighting with each other in the news on a regular basis. So I want you to really think about what you're putting in your head on a regular basis and how you can maybe shift that. Again, from a mental wellness point of view, if you're putting that in your head, or if you're watching, Netflix on a regular basis and you're watching things that are, have a violent nature to it, or you're watching things that are a little bit more on the destructive side, these are thoughts and ideas that are constantly going into your heads. And I'm not saying don't watch the news or don't watch your favorite programming. What I'm inviting you to do is see how you can get some balance. How can you, if you're going to watch the news every day, because I think it's important to stay informed. I have this fight with my mom all the time. She's like, you can't not watch the news. I said, oh, just observe me. I'm not going to watch the news. But she thinks that it's such an important part of life to watch the news and be informed. And I think that there's other ways to be informed. I think that there's other ways to find really good information that's going to impact my day-to-day decisions in my life. So if you're watching the news because you want to be informed, that's great. But what else are you reading? What are the other ideas you're putting in your head? How are you challenging yourself to think about some of these, you think about some of the big societal concerns right now that are hitting everywhere. I talked about stress. I talked about obesity. You think about climate change. You think about the Black Lives Matter movement, and you think about what is going on in the world around inclusion and diversity. We can be putting so much more into our heads right now because that's what's required of us. It is required of us to start to think differently and to become a little bit more open, because the more open we are, the less defensive we can be about our own entrenched, ideas and viewpoints when we start to open up to the ideas and viewpoints of other people, so that we can start moving really important things forward. Like I said, climate change, or, what does Indigenous reconciliation look like? What does it look like for the LGBTQ community and inclusion? These are all huge topics. And like, these are just a couple that I've named. You know, we could go through a list of things, but if you think about mental wellness, we need to allow ourselves to really be a lot more open to different perspectives, to garner a compassion. And if this isn't something that's part of your day-to-day, and you know, it wasn't part of my day-to-day 12 years ago. You know, I didn't put any different thoughts in my head, because I thought that my perspective at the time was, you know, was the only and was the right perspective. And, you know, the older I get and the more exposure that I get to different individuals, different cultures, different ideas, different points of view, the more I actually yearn to be open to it, and the more I know that I don't know. And so that's really the third thing, is putting different things into your head. And there's so many free resources on this. You know, you can Google anything around, you know, a topic of interest around, you know, self-growth, around, you know, what does different perspectives around self-care look like, self-compassion look like. There's a ton of videos that you can watch, and really thought leaders that are starting to change the perspective in this field. So if you're looking for some of those resources where you're like, Jen, you know, thank you for this, and I like this step 3, but I don't know where to go, just make sure that you follow me on intentionalu.ca. And what I'll do on there is I'm going to post a list of some of the podcasts that I'm listening to now that are really changing these conversations. You know, Dax Shepard, Armchair Expert, is probably one of my favorite ones that I'm listening to right now. I also love The Minimalists. They have such great topics. There's Tony Robbins is doing some amazing things on, and he just talks about being in that mental wellness state of mind. So there's lots of people and there's lots of great content out there to be able to dive into. So those are the first 3. The next one is how you move your body. And so this is, you know, an important one. It's really important to fuel your body, to fuel your mind, but we also have to move our body. You know, if you think about how the world has changed over, you know, the centuries, we've become way more sedentary. And, you know, we're sitting, you know, with COVID, a lot of people are, you know, sitting and working from home, or even when we're in the office, we're sitting a lot of the time. And that's, you know, that just has destructive impacts on our body. So you think about our body working in our optimal state and all of our systems within our body working together. Well, if we're sitting and if we're not active and if we're not moving around, again, our systems within our body start to become sluggish, start to slow down. And so the movement of our body it's such an important piece of it. And they talk as we age, even there's a lot of studies out there about, you know, what is the right exercise? Should you be doing yoga? Should you just be walking outside in nature? Should you run? Should you swim? You know, should you be doing cardio exercises, or should you be lifting weights? And, you know, and it's interesting because there is no one exact right answer, because there is no one exact person who is the same, whose body will respond the same to a different activity. So first, if you're starting a new exercise program, or if you're starting even a new diet or eating regime, or starting to eat healthy, you know, if you're maybe not feeling healthy or well within your body, the first thing to do is always make sure that you're consulting a healthcare professional, so that you're actually integrating these things into your life in a safe and sustainable way. Because what I find, especially through when I'm working one-on-one with clients, either, you know, my coaching clients or doing leadership training, what I find is that people get really, 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 really excited about making all of these positive changes in their life, because, you know, they maybe have thought about it differently, or I've maybe prodded them, or, you know, I sometimes prod, push, and, you know, lovingly support individuals all at the same time. But people get excited about making positive changes in their lives, and they want to do everything at once. So that's the one thing that I would say to you is pick one of these areas. So I've talked about 4 areas. Start at the top. If you are really, really good at drinking water and you feel hydrated and you know that, you know, you're drinking enough water because your body feels like that, then start at the second one. Just kind of go down that list. Don't go, okay, Jen, I'm going to start at all 5 of these and do them all right now. That's not really how this works, because it doesn't set us up for success. And that's really what I want for everybody, is a program to set you up for success, to be able to live the best life, for you to have the biggest impact in your life and to be able to enjoy your life. That's really what this is all about. And mental wellness is really that key to it. So that's the fourth one, move your body. A lot of different ways to move your body. And then the fifth one is to get some sleep. This is one of the biggest indicators for me if I am doing the first 4 things. So if I'm actually not drinking water at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I start to feel tired and sluggish. That's my indicator for my body, for me, that I didn't drink enough water during the day. Because if I drink enough water during the day, when 3 o'clock hits, I don't even notice it. I am, you know, I have just as much energy at 3 o'clock as I did at, you know, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's my first indicator for me if something is a little bit off. And then the second really big indicator for me is if I'm not sleeping. If I'm waking up day after day and I'm really, really tired, then I have to go through the list again and say, okay, you know, what is the next best thing? What is 1, not 42, not 7, not 3? What's one thing that I can do today to take control of my quality of life? And sometimes that one thing might be allowing somebody to help me. It might be having a glass of water. That one thing might be picking up the phone and reaching out for help. So there's lots of different one things, but you know, if I think about those 5 things and the mastery of those 5 things, I think that if we can master those 5 things in our lives, knowing that we have peaks and valleys, and you know, we're not perfect because we're humans and we're infallible, but we're not perfect every single moment of every day. But if we can master those 5 things, then our mental wellness is elevated. Our ability to make really good choices in our lives become elevated. When stressors come in our lives, which they will, we have a better ability to be able to choose how we respond to it versus reacting to it. And so this is an opportunity for you to just, you know, even right now, if there's questions coming up, make sure that you're sending them in, and Rashid will pass them along and we can answer them. But if there's questions that are coming up in your head around how do you get started on this, or, you know, Jen, there's got to be something more. This seems too easy. And let me tell you, it's 5 simple things that we can do that we really truly have some level of control over. And you know, I know lots of people will argue with me about, you know, number 5 on the list, which is sleep. I don't have kids, so I have a lot more control over sleep. And I know there's so many people, you know, that do have kids that argue with me over this, but you know, it's about the quality of your sleep. So if you are limited because of your work or because of your family dynamics and you can only get, you know, 5 hours of sleep every night, well, there's a difference between 5 hours of quality sleep and 5 hours of disrupted sleep, because you can't shut your brain off, or because you're thinking about things, or you're worried about things all the time, and you're waking up in the night because, you know, your adrenal glands are firing at, you know, 2 in the morning, and they're off kilter because we've been overusing them because we're stressed out all the time. You know, these are 5 things that can really start to bring a different balance back into your life. And when we start down a path of, you know, taking control of our self-care, of our self-love, if you want to call it, you know, prevention of mental illness, whatever terminology you would like to use for it. But when we start doing this, we're going to see some immediate impacts. You know, if you don't drink water and then all of a sudden you start to drink water, you're going to start to feel better. And it's going to take a couple of days to start to feel better. So if you think about the world right now where we want immediate results, we want, you know, we want to go from 0 to 60 in, you know, a second. And we want, you know, as soon as we think about something, we think that we can bring it into our life immediately. You know, these are simple things, but they do take effort. It does take effort. We're building a habit. You know, we're building a different habit. And that, when I think about mental wellness, it's about building habits so that we can really see the world through objective eyes versus seeing the world through, you know, a clouded vision, or seeing the world always negative or focusing on the negativity. But when we can start to master these 5 things, we can start to see the world and see the opportunities in the world, the opportunities to reach out and help somebody else, the opportunities to be compassionate, the opportunities to give of ourselves in, you know, in the ways that we want to. And if we are, you know, if our bodies are feeling sluggish, if our mind is feeling sluggish because we're not doing some of these things, we can't actually contribute to the level that we are capable of. And I think that, you know, the world needs us right now to be healthy more than ever. You know, you think about even just the situation we're in with the COVID virus. You know, the world is demanding us to take control of our health in a way that we might have taken for granted before. And so those are the 5 things that I really think about when it comes to changing that mental wellness dialogue for ourselves. And what I found is when I started really diving into what were those 5 areas of success for me, because I had to go through that journey myself. That was a big thing. And then the other part of it is it starts to change our mental dialogue. And so mental health is really, I can't remember what the last study was. I think we have like 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. It's a lot of thoughts a day. And 3/4 of them are negative thoughts. And so if we can start to change, you know, how our body is functioning, then we can start to have a little bit of control of that sometimes not so great dialogue that's going on in all of our heads, and focus on the hope and focus on the positivity and the optimism and opportunities that present ourselves. And there's lots of other things that we can do. You know, I talked about exercise, but there's so many amazing studies about just going outside in nature and walking outside and being among, you know, the fields or the trees or the mountains, being around, you know, water. Is all of the things in nature heals. Like, it's just, it comes down to nature heals. So spending more time outside as part of what you put in your head or part of how you move your body, those are important aspects as well. Having a hobby, or, you know, spending time with pets or family members, those are amazing things as well. And learning how to meditate. You know, I did a post this morning around meditation, but it's not really what we think. And so I see that there's a question that popped up. How can we be positive during this stress time, during this pandemic, individual and employer as well? And then there's a second one around kids. So I'm going to answer that first one first, and then we'll dive into the second one. And it's such a good question, especially now when you think about, you know, we're being asked to social distance, not just physical distance. We're using the term social distance. How do we keep that connection? How do we keep it alive? And how do we keep positive? So I do really think that it comes down to those 5 things that I talked about, and making sure that we have a body and a mind that can really be receptive to the positivity. But it comes back to, what are we putting in our head? You know, are we listening to the news? How can we stay positive? You know, the number one thing to start shifting this, the mindset that we have is mindfulness. and that could be done in the form of meditation. There's so many different things around mindfulness, but that's the one thing that can change our mindset from focusing on the negative to focusing on the opportunity or focusing on the positive. So we go through life and we're looking at life. Each one of us has our own lens that we look at life. So if you think about when you go to the optometrist and, what's better, one or two, and they keeps putting these different lenses, and some of them are blurry and some of them make things clearer. So when I think about life, I think about we all have these lenses that we look at life through. And so some of us wear a lens of positivity, some of us wear a lens of negativity, and we're always seeing the negative. Some of us, especially people who are, maybe in the security world or in the, protection world, or police officers or RCMP officers, they'll see the world through the eyes of looking for threats, because they're about, safety and defending. So we all have different lenses. So we could look at life through a lens of hope or optimism. We could look at it through the lens of grief. So, I think that there's consciousness and choice of what lens we actually want to look at the world through, because we all get that choice of how we want to view the world. I personally want to view the world through the eyes of joy. And I can be sad through the eyes of joy. I can be compassionate through that lens that I have for my life. But when I look at life through a lens of joy, I can find the beauty everywhere. Whether it's outside looking at a flower and just getting ingrained in the intricacies of that flower, or marveling at living in Saskatchewan, we've had crazy winds for the last several months coming out of the south, and just to marvel in the wind. And if we look at through that lens of joy or curiosity, we see things differently. So as an individual, it's how open are you to looking at things differently and changing your perspective. And then as an employer, I think about as being, having come from the corporate world and being still ingrained in the corporate world, I've got to witness mental illness in a different way. And it's actually rocked my world a little bit. As an employer, mental wellness was always on my radar, and the health and the safety of the people that reported to me that I got to serve on a regular basis was one of the most important things to me as a leader. But when it came to mental wellness, and I think about being at the Ministry of Highways, and that was almost 4 years ago, the conversation has changed even so much in the last 4 years around mental health, mental wellness, and mental illness. And as an employer, we need to be open, and we need to take a different level of responsibility, because when I think about the responsibility, if you're a supervisor or if you're a manager or a leader in an organization, we have a different responsibility. And so we need to start having different conversations with people. And I think, when I think about some of the other questions that are coming in about social networking and connecting with each other from a social point of view, we need to have different conversations, because there's still, unfortunately, there is still a stigma around mental illness. And so even today, I'm talking about mental wellness because, mental wellness is our first safeguard from mental illness. But when we have mental illness, when we see our friends and our family, suffering from, anxiety or extreme stress or depression, it changes your viewpoint, and it's changed mine. Because, I consider myself, I'm very fortunate to not have had gone through mental illness, but I've watched people who I love go through that, and wow, it changed me as a leader, and I look at things differently as a leader. And and I start to have different conversations with the people that I work with. So when I start to notice signs of people not typically acting as they typically would. So if somebody is very positive and then they, for 3 or 4 days in a row, they're negative, or you can see their energy is off or they're down, I start that conversation then, because, having somebody notice, I think as individuals, we really want to be seen, heard, and understood. So having somebody actually notice that we're a little bit off and starting that conversation as an employer is one of the most important things. So the next question is, how can we keep our kids motivated as they're spending most of their time at home? And how important is exercise for kids? So by no means whatsoever am I an expert on this. I do not have children, but I get to observe my sister's 3 kids, and I like to be the crazy fun aunt. But it's such an interesting thing, because you think about now, kids aren't at school, they're not interacting with their friends. They might not have the mental capacity yet to understand what the heck is going on in the world and why they can't see their friends, because they don't, necessarily cognitively understand it. So I think that, from, again, my limited knowledge of having kids, which is none, I think that there's a lot of support out there. There's lots of really cool interactive programs on the internet, but at home, have the conversation, start talking to them. There's cool, the same thing for kids as what I said for us as adults. Make sure they're drinking water, that they're getting good nutrition in their body, that they're putting good stuff in their head, and they're not just on their computers playing games all the time, that they're interacting, maybe virtually with other kids, and they're reading things, and that they're moving their body and getting some sleep. I think that those 5 things apply to both adults and kids. And there's some really cool things. I actually saw today that Tony Robbins is developing a blue gorilla avatar to start talking to kids and meeting them where they're at a different level. So there's a ton of resources out there for kids. And, I have some really good friends who have a lot of wealth in that area. So what I'll do is I'm going to grab some of those resources for kids, and then I'll share it with Rashid, and he can put it on the Voice of Saskatoon and just kind of reply to this stream. And I'll make sure that I get that up for tomorrow. And then I'll also post some of that on mine, because it's a great question. And I don't pose to know any of the answers to that, because not having kids myself. I do have pets, and for them, exercise is the most important thing, and getting them outside and having walks. I have 1 dog now. I had 2, but they get 3 to 4 walks every single day. So I think that exercise is so important, because the more we move our body, the more we can be open to bringing in new ideas in our mind. And so how important is social networking to keeping your mind healthy? I think that it's so important. And I'm an extrovert, so I just also want to acknowledge the difference between being an extrovert and introverts, where it's really that difference on where we get our energy from. So extroverts, during this time when, we're maybe a lot more separate and we don't have that physical interaction, it's, every single one of us have phones, have devices. And I know that because if you're watching this, you're watching it on some sort of device. So it's about picking up the phone and having a relationship and calling people in, the old-fashioned way, just not just texting people, but having conversations with people again. And, we can still interact socially and stay physically distant. So starting to be safe, and safety is always so important, but starting to be safe and integrating some of that back into our lives in a different way. But there's so many things right now online of connecting through Zoom, where we can have meetings like this, or you can follow and go into different Facebook groups where people are yearning right now for connection, for meaningful connection, not just talking about, you know, things that don't matter, but people yearning for meaningful connection. And one thing that, again, I love the most about Rashid is that he gets out there into the community and, you know, he doesn't wait for it to find him. He goes out and he creates it. And there's something to be said about, you know, getting up and having the courage to take action to create the social network that you want and to have the impact in society that you want to have. So I think it's very, very important. And then I always go back to, you know, introverts where, you know, you get your energy from, you know, from being alone. I think being in nature, that's an amazing, you know, I'm an accountant by trade, and I've been, you know, at the highest ranks of senior executive on the senior executive teams, but I still, you know, go out into nature and hug trees because I'm a little bit of a hippie at heart. Maybe that's my Saskatchewan farming upbringing in me, but you know, there's so many things that we can do. You can volunteer at, you know, a local humane society, and, you know, even connection with pets is an important part of our social construct. So there's, you know, this topic I could talk about for hours, but I think you might be a little bit sick of hearing my voice drone on because I think I've been talking for about 45 minutes now. And I'm not sure, Rashid, if there was any other questions. I know that people asked how can they connect with me in the future. There's a couple of different ways. One, you can send me an email to jen@intentionalu.ca. You can actually go onto my website, which is intentionalu.ca, and you can interact with me there. I have programs actually coming up. I have some masterminds that I'm developing right now, a mastermind for senior executives who are looking at, who just really need a space for them to be able to, you know, be supported, talk about ideas, be innovative. So that's one group. I have a group for emerging leaders that is coming up to connect different emerging leaders in a training program there. I'm also having, you know, challenges through my my Facebook page, intentionalu.ca, but if you search that, and we can put that in the reply on the Facebook Live here as well, where you can go over to my Facebook page. And I'm creating groups and I'm creating weekly challenges. I started one this week on meditation and what meditation is and what meditation isn't. So anybody who wants to connect with me, those are some ways to for sure connect with me and stay in touch. One thing when you're connecting with me, you know, I think that Rashid read it at the beginning. I'm edgy, I'm funny, and I'm also a little bit sweary. So if that's something you're okay with when you're on my Facebook page, when I'm doing Facebook Lives on my page, I'm a little sweary. So I wanted to make sure that today I kept it professional, knowing that there's a wide audience, and this isn't my audience. This is the Voice of Saskatoon's audience, and I love what you guys are doing for the community, and I really wanted to make sure to respect your community, because not everybody has that same flavor and languaging that I do. So if you want to connect with me, I just give you that as a preface up front, that on my page I'm a little bit more liberal with my words. Yeah. And so I've gone through quite a bit today, and like I said, this is such a huge topic: mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, and the more we can talk about it, the more we can connect, the more we can really change this dialogue in organizations, in our own heads, and in society as a general construct. So yeah, Rashid, is there anything else you wanted me to talk about or to touch on today?
Well, I think you have covered everything thoroughly, and I really enjoyed your conversation, and I always inspire with your work, which you are doing, because it's always spreading the message of positivity, and I always see your post about nature, and I love nature too. So, you know, like, thank you. I think we don't have any questions so now. But if you have any questions, so I will post information about Jennifer's page. So it's www.intentionalu.ca, and you can find all the information from here. Well, thank you, Jennifer, on behalf of Voice of Saskatoon team for joining us today and giving your precious time. We really appreciate it, and we will definitely continue these type of webinars because these are really helpful. And I think that was the time to actually talk about mental health and wellness, and we got some appreciation from our listeners too. And we will run this show again tomorrow at 9 a.m. from CFCR studio. So if you missed that program, you can also watch our program on Facebook Live page or Facebook page. And you can also listen on CFCR 90.5 FM at 9 a.m. Well, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Rashid, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in. And one thing that I always like to do and ask of people is if there's anything that you found today that that really shifted your perspective on this topic, on this conversation, post it in the comments below, because I'm going to come back over the next week and just, check out the comments. So post your takeaways, because there's one thing to hear the information, but there's another thing to, to go back in your mind, if you've written notes, or if you rewatch it and take some notes, go back and kind of just comment on what are your biggest takeaways from today. I think that that's important. And if there's somebody that if you've watched this, and if there's somebody that that you think could really would really benefit from hearing this message, share this with them. Share the good work that the Voice of Saskatoon is doing. And if you want to connect them with me as well, invite them over to the conversation on my Facebook page, because that's really what this conversation is about there. So connect them there. But, there's a difference between listening to the information and doing something about it. So my challenge to you is, if you've listened to this, if you've taken this in, I'm really curious about what's the one thing you're going to do differently because of today. Because we need to start shifting this from just a conversation to a demonstration. And once we start shifting it to demonstrating what mental wellness looks like, what it feels like, we can start lifting that stigma on mental illness. So it has to move from conversation to demonstration. So that's the challenge for you today, to really post in here, what your takeaways are, and think about what are you going to do differently because of it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. And I think Paula might have a question. So, Paula, if you can maybe send a message here, and we can take it, and so we will wait for a few minutes, and we'll see that if she has a message. I think we need to find a way where people can join our conversation too, and they can ask questions lively. So that will be amazing. Maybe in the future it will be coming soon. So because technology is growing, and like during pandemic, Jennifer, I would like to share that in the meanwhile, hopefully Paula will send us message that when the pandemic happened, so we were not sure that how we will be doing this show, and like it was just a stress, because every point where you stuck gives you pressure. So I was feeling pressure, like how we will do it. But then we find out Zoom, and I think it's going pretty well. We are sharing our videos and our program all over the world. So it's going, it's working.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I will recommend that if you have any questions, so we will post information about Jennifer's page, and also we can share the link for her Facebook page too, so you can ask those questions.
Yeah. And they can also go, Rashid, to my my page on LinkedIn. So I also have a page on LinkedIn that kind of has the progression of, my leadership journey on there. But if they want to connect in a professional way, and, from talks like this that I've done, people have connected with me because they really wanted this same sort of talk with a very focus on the organization to happen within their organization. So if anybody wants to connect with me, this is something that I'm really passionate about, is changing the conversation in our head, in our workplaces, as well as in our communities, so that we can really tap into our potential. So if you want to do that, LinkedIn is the best place for that too.
Yeah, and if you would allow us, then we can share your LinkedIn profile, maybe a link on our Facebook page as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you again and have a good evening. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of the week.
I will. I'm going out right now, go and have the third walk of the day with my dog. So I'm, like I said, a little bit of a hippie by heart. So it'll be barefoot walk on the dirt road behind my house. And then at 9 o'clock, watch the sunset. So that's what I have in store for the exciting evening.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
thank you and have a
Thanks,
good day.
Rashid.
Bye-bye.
Bye.